Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for the Outdoor Art Club presentation with Mayor Urban Campbell, Bruce Dorfman, and Danielle Staude. I'm Erin Griffiths, and I'm working with my fellow OAC Zoom member, Cherry Jones, to bring you this program. For those of you who are not familiar with the Outdoor Art Club, we're a nonprofit women's organization founded in 1902. The club engages in civic, cultural, and charitable work in our community, including presenting public programs like this one. At this time, I'd like to introduce Suzanne Sweet. Suzanne is also a member of the Outdoor Art Club and program chair for today's event. Thank you, Suzanne, for bringing us today's program.
Good day, everybody. The Outdoor Art Club is sponsoring this program to clarify the facts and myths about state-mandated housing rules so we can all be better informed. We're fortunate to have 3 active participants in the well-being of Mill Valley to share their knowledge regarding mandated housing. Urban Carmel is the mayor of Mill Valley and has lived in our town for 25 years. Before being elected to City Council in 2020, he was the chair of the Planning Commission. While on the council, he has been the council lead for the Housing Advisory Committee, the Housing Element, and for the city's 100% affordable housing development at 1 Hamilton Drive. He was on the Finance, Transportation, Business Vitality, and Police Oversight. He was a board member of the Chamber of Commerce and currently serves on the Board of Transportation Authority of Marin. In 2010, he began a long association with the Mill Valley Library Foundation, serving as president for 2 years. Danielle Staude is principal planner for the City of Mill Valley, responsible for long-range planning and policymaking. She is a Marin County resident and has worked for Mill Valley for over 17 years. The first 5 years of her career in Mill Valley were dedicated to the Miller Avenue Streetscape Plan, followed by the Comprehensive General Plan update in 2013. For the past 8 years, Danielle has focused on sustainability and housing-related programs. During her Mill Valley tenure, Danielle has worked to help the city adopt 3 housing elements, establish affordable housing impact fee that provides dedicated funds for the city to use on affordable housing projects, and endless updates to the city's regulations to address new state housing laws, some of which she will mention in today's presentation. Bruce Dorfman has been a resident of Mill Valley for nearly 40 years, and he and his wife have raised their 4 boys here. He's a partner of Thompson Dorfman Partners, LLC, a Mill Valley-based developer of urban multifamily projects and co-founder of Education Housing Partners, Inc., EHP, a California nonprofit corporation that focuses exclusively on the development of workforce housing for public school districts and agencies. EHP has been the forefront of building workforce housing since being selected by the Santa Clara Unified School District in 2000 as the design-build developer of the award-winning Casa del Maestro community. Bruce also serves on the board of directors of several local nonprofits, including Mill Valley Little League. For all our guests, please submit your questions in the Q&A tab so our panelists can answer at the end of the presentation. And with that, I'll turn it over to the panelists. Urban.
Hi, everybody. I'm Urban Carmel. I'm your mayor if you live in Mill Valley. Thanks so much for being here today. The way we've set this up is I'm going to give you a brief overview of Mill Valley about how housing cycles work, how our housing plan. Then I'm going to turn it over to Danielle Staude, who is our senior planner with the city. And Danielle and I have been working together the last several years on the housing plan itself. She's going to go into the details about what that plan is. And then finally, Bruce Dorfman, who's well known to everybody, who's a private developer, and housing is actually done by private development. So Bruce is going to talk about how he's going to implement the housing plan in the city of Mill Valley as well as the rest of Marin where he works. So that's basically the setup for today's discussion. And there'll be plenty of time for question and answer. So we look forward to a lively discussion. So let me just start by telling you a little bit about Mill Valley and how the housing plan works. So you might be surprised to know that Mill Valley is the third largest city in Marin. We've got 11 cities in Marin. We've got the county. There's 12 jurisdictions. This is a town of 14,000 people. If you include Tam Valley, Strawberry Village, and Homestead Valley, that's 30,000 people, and that's 94941. Population growth in this town is very close to zero. Over the last 35 years, our population has grown by 0.2% per year. So it's basically flat. Our housing stock in the city of Mill Valley, in housing stock is counted by units. We've got 6,600 housing units in Mill Valley. A housing unit could be a 1-bedroom apartment. It could be a 10-bedroom house. They're both called housing units. You might be surprised to find or to learn that 30% of the housing units in Mill Valley are apartments. So 70% are single-family residential homes and 30% are apartments. That's pretty typical for Marin County. Tiburon is similar, San Anselmo is similar, Fairfax, Corte Madera, they're all very similar to Mill Valley. 70% homes, 30% apartments. Ross and Belvedere are extreme in one direction. They're 90% plus single-family residential. Larkspur and Sausalito are extreme in the other direction. They are primarily apartment cities. So cities are a little bit different, but Mill Valley is a very typical city in most respects when it comes to the kind of housing stock that we've got. A house in Mill Valley costs on average or median about $2.5 million. If you were to rent in Mill Valley, your rent would be about $3,000. And that's for a typical apartment in Mill Valley. That's high. So we have something that we call the area-wide median income. And in Marin, that's about $130,000 per year. That's what the typical household makes. And in order to afford $3,000 in rent in Mill Valley, you pretty much have to make that area-wide median income. So that's a pretty high bar. 54% of our people that work in Mill Valley cannot afford to live in Mill Valley because it's too expensive. So they are cost burdened. So it's hard to work and live in Mill Valley. And that's one of the issues that we're going to be talking about. So I've been in city government for 8 years. I was a planning commissioner for 4 years. I was chair of the planning commission before I got elected to the city council. I've been working in housing for the last 8 years. I was surprised when I got involved in this to learn about how housing planning works in the state of California. So essentially what happens is the state of California says, hey, we are short housing. This is how many housing units we want to produce over the next 8 years. And then what they do is they say, okay, Northern California, you need to make this number of homes. And then Bay Area, you need to make this number of homes. And then they say within the county of Marin, okay, Marin, this is how many homes we need you to build. And in the city of Mill Valley and Sausalito and Tiburon, these are your individual allocations. That's called RHNA, Regional Housing Needs Assessment. And that's one of the acronyms that you'll hear in housing. So, and I'll get into the details on that. And that goes into something called the housing element. The housing element, in simple terms, is just the housing plan. It basically is a planning document that Danielle is the lead city staffer on, that I have been the lead from the city council on. And that's how we basically intend on producing, where we intend on planning to have those housing units placed within the city of Mill Valley. So we've been doing this for about 50 years in California. We just finished what's called the 5th cycle of the housing element, and we're now starting on the 6th cycle. The 5th cycle, we had to produce 130 units, new units of housing in the city of Mill Valley. And when I was a planning commissioner, that's what we were working on. When I got onto city council in 2021, we started working on the 6th cycle housing element. That's the current housing plan. And we worked on that for about 18 months. We had, I think, 12 different public meetings where we got the community to engage in helping us figure out how we're going to do the housing plan. Again, Danielle will go into the details about that. But I want to tell you about 3 specific things about this housing plan, which I think are quite remarkable. The first is we have to produce over the next 8 years, or at least plan to produce 865 new housing units in the city of Mill Valley. That's a 600% increase over the prior cycle. So it's a very, very dramatic increase in the number of housing units that we have to plan for within the city of Mill Valley. It is easily, by far, the most demanding housing element this city or any city in California has ever had to produce. That's the first most remarkable thing about it. The second thing, which is remarkable about it, is that half of those units have to be affordable. That means they have to be units that people making below the area-wide median income, in fact, below 80% of the area-wide median income, can afford to rent or buy. So that's the second part, which is quite remarkable. And then the third part is, regardless of topography, we have to produce those units, or at least plan for those units. And that's really difficult. Here's the thing about Mill Valley. Mill Valley is 97% built out. We have 3% of our lots are vacant. And when I was a planning commissioner, I had roughly about 250 different meetings on applications in the city of Mill Valley during my time on the planning commission. And you know that in all of those meetings, we only once looked at a site that had never been built on. If you go out on Cascade Drive past the Tenderfoot Trail on the left-hand side, there's a relatively new house. It's green in color. It's up against the hillside. That is the only property that we were involved in as a planning commission in getting entitled for a new home during the 4 years that I was on the planning commission. It took 5 meetings to get that house approved so that they could be built. That's how hard it is to build on these remaining 3% of these properties in Mill Valley that have never been built on. So that's the first thing, which is a big challenge for us. The second thing is 86% of the parcels in Mill Valley are either in a fire zone or a flood zone. 86%. The remaining 14% are right in the downtown core. That's an area which is safe from fire, safe from flood, so to speak. So that's the second thing, which is remarkable. And finally, 35% of our streets are less than 16 feet wide. And that's significant because a fire truck needs at least 16 feet to get down. So we have a highly constrained built environment, and that makes it really hard to build new homes in the city of Mill Valley. So it's a hard place to build. Building affordable housing is also very challenging. Affordable housing, and Bruce, I'm sure will go into detail on this thing, is essentially subsidized housing. It's loss-making housing. Talk to any developer about building affordable housing, a for-profit developer I'm talking about, and they'll say this is where they lose money. They have to make it up on the market housing. So it's very difficult. And again, half of our housing allocation has to go to affordable housing. That's housing which is expensive to build. It's not inexpensive housing to build. It costs a lot of money to build it, but it rents out for below market. In Mill Valley, we've only got 3 existing 100% affordable housing developments. And I think you're probably familiar with all of these. We have Shelter Hill that was built in 1975. That's got built in 1977. It's got 75 units. We've got Pickleweed, which is only 32 units, built in the mid 80s. And we've got Alta Station, which is only 17 units, built in the 1990s. So it's been over 30 years since we've done an 100% affordable housing development in Mill Valley. When I was a planning commissioner, we created something called the Housing Advisory Committee. The Housing Advisory Committee was set up in order to help create affordable housing in Mill Valley. So that was 7 years ago. This year, we finally entitled a new 100% affordable housing development in Mill Valley. It's by Hockey Park. You might have heard about it. It's 45 units, and it is now going to be called Bayfront Terrace. That project, like I said, it was approved by the City Council and the Planning Commission at the beginning of this year. That means it's got a final design, and that means that it's been evaluated for its environmental impact. And the environmental impact has been shown to shown to be something which can be mitigated. In other words, it's not going to have a significant impact on our environment in Mill Valley. So that is now an approved project. That project is out for financing. Danielle is going to show you some pictures of that project, as well as give you a little bit more of the timeline on it. But long story short, it took us 7 years to get to this point where that project has been entitled. And now it's going to take us probably 2 years to get the construction plans and the financing in place. And then that project will be built and hopefully opened around 2027 or 2028. So that's an overview of what we're doing in Mill Valley with respect to housing. To summarize, this is a very ambitious plan that the state has put in front of every single community in the state of California. We have a very challenging environment in which to build in Mill Valley. And finally, and I think this will resonate with everybody that's on this call. We as citizens of Mill Valley, we prize the beauty of our town, and we are very concerned about the safety of our residents because of fire risk primarily. And the big challenge that we've got over the next 8 years is how we go and accomplish what we are required to accomplish with the state mandate for housing and maintain the safety of our residents and the beauty of our city. That's the challenge that we've got ahead of us. So it's going to be a challenging period for all of us to try to accomplish these goals, and while keeping those two things in mind. So now to go into the details on the housing plan itself that we've got for the next 8 years, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Danielle Staude. She is going to go through that details, and then we'll go to question and answers afterwards. Thank you very much. Danielle, this is your cue to start up.
Got it. I'm just trying to get my screen all organized here. Thank you to the mayor for setting me up for a great conversation here. Let me just get my screen set up here too. Share my screen. Okay, so hopefully you can see my screen here. Okay, can I ask just, are you seeing 2 slides or just one? I'm hoping you're just seeing this one. Hold on, let me try to do this one more time to make sure you're seeing the right thing. Here. Okay, great. So thank you. My name's Danielle Staude, and I'm with the City of Mill Valley. I'm the principal planner. I've been here for a while. I've done a few of the housing elements for the city. So as the mayor was mentioning, housing costs continue to outpace wages. Other ways to look at this are looking at multifamily and thinking about renters. Renters need basically really a high salary in order to afford rent in Mill Valley. If you're looking at the average wage of the just a minimum wage worker, it's over 4 full-time jobs. And you need about over $60 an hour of a wage in order to make things work. And that is basically for a multifamily. And multifamily units in town, there's the stock of housing, which is about 20 to 30% that is related to multifamily. And what I've taken off the table is really the conversation, because single family is not really attainable when you're looking at anything that's above the median. And for our housing stock for single family, you're looking at basically a salary that's really in the higher range of salaries in Marin County that are over 400,000, assuming a 20 down and a 30-year fixed mortgage, but that's for a $2 million house. So when we went through the housing element, we talked about, and we talked with the community about concerns related to housing, and the concerns are, as many of you, I'm sure, feel the workforce, seniors are definitely disconnected and not part of the community. They're either isolated, living at home by themselves, or can't change their place of where they live, which can be an issue. And we call that housing mobility. Having the opportunity to live in different places within Mill Valley. Once you live in Mill Valley, trying to find a different place to live is often difficult, even though your situation might change. For instance, your family might grow or shrink depending on your age and things that are happening in your life. So that's an issue that we're facing here in Mill Valley. The other thing we're facing is a lack of diversity, and this goes back, economic and racial. And that can also be reflective of the fact that our housing stock is either expensive or there is a lack of availability in the different opportunities of multifamily or affordable. And hiring and retaining employees, we've seen the impacts, and we feel the impacts daily, I think, as we use our services in Mill Valley. And lastly, there's also concerns about just being forced to move and relocate. And that's related also to new concerns that have been identified as part of talking with the community for the housing element. There's a conversation now. Not only are we worried about our older population and our seniors, we're now worried about the younger generation. We're worried about our kids. We're worried about the ability to connect with potentially our future generation. Having them come back to where they did grow up is becoming more and more difficult. Divorced families having to leave because of two households not being able to survive the market in Mill Valley or Marin. And the other thing that's happening that I'm getting some phone calls on are renters that are actually in affordable units, but because the income ranges are increasing, even affordable units on a fixed income is getting difficult. When we talk about affordable housing, there's different ranges of affordable housing. This is an example of the affordable housing categories. There's very low, moderate, and above moderate. And there's examples on the screen for you to see an example of a moderate income household for 4 people. Now in 2024 is $279,000. Well, that used to be less than $200,000 in 2022. So the gap is growing in terms of the affordability, especially if you think about those that are on a fixed income. That could be either minimum wage employees or seniors. And the other thing that's communicated on this slide is just as the mayor is talking about, our allocated number of regional housing that we're not required to build, we're required to illustrate that there's capacity through our land use and zoning to facilitate 865 new units. So as I just like to also throw out the fact that while it might seem that we're very far apart, the state and local and regional entities, we're all interested really in doing the same thing. We're just approaching it at different ways, at the regional level, at the state level, but then at the local level. So we try to balance that, but really what we're trying to do is we're trying to protect and preserve what we have. We're trying to diversify housing and enhance affordability where we can. And then we need to expand and produce units for sure. So that's the additional 865. And then building community through making sure that we're looking through different lenses and understand our community, but also welcoming others to diversify our community. And that's through inclusive practices, sustainability, and fair furthering fair housing. So in terms of trends, how do we get there? How do we start talking about putting more units on the table? We looked at our constraints and our opportunities. And this is just an example of the mayor talked about some of our land use constraints. Opportunities, we're doing a great job in terms of building accessory dwelling units, but as you can see, we're not building very many multifamily units or even small duplexes. And there's above moderate is also an indication that our housing stock's not changing much. And so what can we do to potentially produce more units? And that's what the housing element does. In having those conversations, we have to prove up that these sites can potentially actually be built on. So those with long-term leases have to come off the table. Those in parcels that are in the unincorporated county have to come off the table. So that's how we flesh out where the sites can go. The church sites, the religious institutions, we need to have more conversations with the religious institutions, which we're doing, to potentially see if there's some interest in building on those sites. So based on all that information, we work on programs. We have different themes of the programs in order to facilitate housing. Also, not just facilitating new housing, but making sure we're keeping housing, the supply and diversity, what we have, and maintaining what we have. So singles family zones, what are the opportunities there? Accessory dwelling units are a big opportunity, and you've seen we built 29 units last year. Duplexes are also now allowed in some areas, and these are all state laws that have streamlined approval. This also allows for generational housing within a single family home. And actively, what I would say what the community could do is, as acknowledging a small town character and interest, is acknowledging potentially opening up our homes if there is space to allow for other community members to live in the community. And with that, I'll talk about well, there's two things here that I'll point out. There's ADU Marin, so that if you are interested in having a accessory dwelling unit put on your property, there is a free 1-hour consultation. You can contact me if you want more information, or you can go to the website shown. There's also a program related to really targeting the seniors and workforce. We have, the mayor mentioned, we have about 70% of our housing stock is single family. We also have 30% of our seniors that are 80% of our seniors that are homeowners, and 30% live alone. So there's this opportunity potentially where there is a large home with a lot of vacant space. So we do have a program. It's with Home Match. They're great because they walk you through the whole process. They help find someone that would meet your needs and interests, and they are there throughout the rental of the house or space. So there's a person there that can provide input and feedback and mediation if needed throughout the life of the home match. And there's the information there. A large portion that we focused on for the housing element was the commercial zones, because that's where the opportunity for putting units on new housing units. And as the mayor mentioned, we have other areas that are very, very constrained. So we focused on the areas of the commercial areas for potentially new housing. With that, we also looked at adaptive reuse. This is an example of Mill Valley on the limited commercial zoning district, where you see there's a lot of old houses that were actually houses at one time and now have been converted for retail use or other office use. And now maybe we're back to, okay, well, why don't we think about maybe allowing these to not maybe function as a single family home, but as a duplex. And you see that in a lot of different places throughout the Bay Area, as well as, visiting other countries. We also require affordable housing. If you build a larger project, 1 in 4 units must be affordable. That is something that, you'll hear from Bruce coming up here, that can be difficult. So we have streamlined and provided some opportunities where if in some of these overlay zones, if you build smaller units, 1,000 square feet or less, that you do not need to provide those affordable units, with the understanding that those 1,000 square foot units will be more attainable in terms of rent. Let's see here. In speaking about truly affordable housing, where all the units are affordable, we've had conversations and we worked really hard to get where we are in terms of building on a piece of property that's city owned. A few nuggets of information that are important in terms of building affordable housing. The largest cost is land, so that's why we used our own land. You need at least 40 to 42 units in order for it to pencil out. It used to be 40, now it's 42. It's probably more than that now. To remember, you also have construction and ongoing operations. You have a manager that's part of these units, so that's important to know. It is an important way of diversifying housing stock. I will also mention that there is some openings at Pickleweed and there's some openings at Alto Station. The information on your screen gives you the websites where you can contact them. I will just say that Pickleweed is income-based and the other Alto Station is related to disabilities. I won't belabor this. If there's questions, I can follow up, but we do have a new approved project at 1 Hamilton, which we now call Bayfront Terrace. There's 44 new families that will be in the very low and low income range that will have the opportunity to live here in Mill Valley and go to our schools and use our services, which is great. And we hope that it will open in 2026. We're working on the funding mechanisms for that project now. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and I will turn this over to Bruce.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Bruce Dorfman. My firm, Thompson Dorfman Partners, has been located in Mill Valley for the better part of 40 years. We're actually situated in downtown Mill Valley. This is an example of some of the projects that we've been involved with over that period of time, but we've developed over 75 projects in California, composed of roughly 18,000 units of housing. Our focus has been on developing high quality urban infill and mixed use properties, but we do have some experience, several projects that we've been involved with in Marin County, including the village at Loch Lomond Marina, which is located on the lower left-hand corner. Our principals, my partner Will Thompson, who actually started the firm, was, my partner Will Thompson actually is a resident of Mill Valley as well and has lived here for that entire 40-year period. In 2000, we were contacted by the Santa Clara Unified School District. We had developed a number of housing projects in Santa Clara. And the Santa Clara Unified School District had this interesting issue. In 1995, they had, or the state had a budget surplus, and there was, through that budget surplus, there was a focus on class size reduction. So Santa Clara Unified and other school districts throughout the state proceeded to go on a hiring rampage to bring in new teachers to get class sizes under 20 students. California became the largest importer of teachers from around the country. Simultaneously, the dot-com boom was occurring, and what Santa Clara Unified was exposed to was an attrition rate that increased 300% in that 5-year period. Once they analyzed this, they realized they had two distinct types of teachers. One was this new cohort that were new to the area. They frequently came from the upper Midwest in the case of Santa Clara Unified, and they were offered starting salaries of $40,000 to $45,000 a year. The other cohort happened to be older teachers that had been with the district for 15 or 20 years. And the commonality of that cohort was that they owned homes in and around the district. Once Santa Clara Unified started analyzing this data, they realized that all their attrition was with these young teachers who, on an after-tax basis, due to the dot-com boom and what was going on in the market, could no longer afford to live in their community. And consequently, they were either moving to other areas where they had a lower affordability level, or they were leaving the profession altogether. We built a project for them. We were selected to build Casa del Maestro in 2000, and that project was completed in 2002. That's on the lower right-hand corner. And subsequently, we've now been engaged by dozens of districts throughout the state to work on creating workforce housing. And we created a nonprofit called Education Housing Partners to work exclusively with public agencies and school districts. Although you've received a lot of data already, I think that this chart tells you a lot. We look a little bit more holistically at the county, and the county has somewhere in the range of 110,000 housing units. But in the past 30 years, so from 1990 on, we've only created less than 10,000 new units. That's incredibly low, particularly compared to the other counties in the Bay Area. At the same time, our average home costs have increased dramatically by over 40 times. And although I realize not everyone was fortunate enough to buy in the 70s, even if you bought in the 90s, you have seen substantial increases in home values. The most important part of this chart, or what I want to focus on, is the fact that in 1990, there was the passage of the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. And that changed the requirements for accessibility of internally within units and to accessibility throughout our communities. And the important thing about that is, as we age in place, it's more and more important that we have accommodations that we can move into that allow for the less ambulatory to live a good quality of life. Unfortunately, as this chart emphasizes, very few units have been built, and single-family units that represent over 90% of the housing stock that's been created in the past 30 years is exempt from ADA. So a very small portion of new units have actually been built to allow older and less ambulatory folks to move into them. As Danielle mentioned, the median income for a family of four in Marin County is $175,000. And frankly, if you make under $100,000, or if you make $100,000 and you're a family of four, you're still considered to be a low-income household. It's pretty astounding. So another issue with the lack of creation of new housing is that, from a practical standpoint, most of the housing that currently exists throughout our county is older and obsolete, but it lacks resiliency and sustainability. It's not built to the current codes. We have antiquated floor plans. We talked about accessibility. There's minimum options for empty nesters to move out into quality new housing, and there's limited infill housing opportunities as well, because the majority of the sites, as Urban was mentioning, are either developed, they're smaller in terms of their acreage, or they're located in areas that are somewhat challenging from a topography or physical constraint standpoint. All this triggers or causes high housing costs. Development is a function of the following three legs of the stool. There's the political constraints. We also have the site constraints, which are the physical issues. And finally, we have project economics, which is a function of the market as well as design. And so without dwelling on this, I just want to mention this is the way, or the process, that we're analyzing any sort of housing opportunity. And that gets us to the following phases. So once we figure out if a site can meet those thresholds to pursue, then we enter the entitlement phase. Most of the new legislation and what we're discussing relative to the housing element is that portion, or lies within that chevron of this chart. Once entitlements are received, then we go into permitting and financing, and then construction, and ultimately we proceed into operations. The state laws that have been factored into this analysis, and that Danielle alluded to, the Housing Crisis Act, State Density Bonus Law, Housing Accountability Act, RENA, and then ultimately we another avenue that we have to pursue as we're simultaneously going through an entitlement process is CEQA, so the California Environmental Quality Act. It's actually an independent process from the entitlement process, but at the same time, it is typically pursued concurrently. So I have two case studies. One is our project in Belvedere, that's referred to as Mallard Point. And Mallard Point was built in 1951. It's 22 units that are in duplex configurations, all one story. Because of when the project was built nearly 75 years ago, it is obsolete from a floor plan standpoint. It sits on bay mud, so it's been subject to, frankly, sinking within the bay mud. And it's also in a 100-year floodplain, so any kind of significant improvements need to be addressed by raising either the site or the residential levels to get out of that 100-year floodplain, which in this case means we have to raise the units anywhere from 3 to 6 feet. We spoke to the city of Belvedere about the go-forward plan and the fact that effectively it didn't make sense to just rebuild or raise the existing units, considering the design of them, and that we should start from scratch with a blank sheet of paper, which they were in agreement with. Subsequently, we came up with a new plan that has 40 units, of which there are a combination of 6 single-family homes, 18 townhomes, 15 apartments, as well as 1 ADU. We completed the SB 330 application, which we can get into more detail during the Q&A, in August of 2021. And that provides you a 6-month window to complete a formal application, and gives you certain benefits for doing that during that 6-month period. Our formal application was filed in January 2022, and the application was deemed complete by the city in June of 2022. However, it took nearly a year and a half to get to a first hearing, and ultimately we've been approved through design reviews. We have one last approval, which will be in May. But the reason why I focus on this is, even with all of the permit streamlining acts that have been put in place, we still had over a 3-year process to get to this point. And then taking it a step further, then we have to permit the project. That's going to take another 12 to 18 months, and then build it, which is another anywhere from 18 to 36 months. So by the time we're done with this process, we're looking at new housing that's taking somewhere between, 5 and 10 years. It's not a quick process to get the project built. In this situation, the community benefits included, there is a 10% affordability requirement, and we also have 10% of the units that are affordable by design. We mentioned about the sustainability, resiliency, and accessibility of the new units. We're making a huge reinvestment in the housing and the infrastructure around the site. And the last thing I'll mention is that although this project was very controversial, remains very controversial, it was half the density allowed by the state density bonus law. Another project that we're involved with right now is Oak Hill Apartments. Oak Hill Apartments is a surplus site that was part of the San Quentin campus. It's adjacent to Drake's Cove Road on Sir Francis Drake. We formed a JPA between the Marin County Office of Education and the County of Marin to provide faculty and staff housing for employees, for teachers, educators, and county employees. And 135 units will be created as part of this process. This, again, is part of the state's focus on creating more housing. We were selected by the state in 2021, and we hope to start construction after the first of the year. The housing will all be focused on affordable levels for the workforce, which are between 50 and 120% of AMI, and the rental rates are set at the minimum to cover debt service, operating expenses, and reserves. The main focus of this, and why both the county and the Marin County Office of Education and their subsequent districts are so interested in this, is it helps us attract a more diverse employment base. And that is something that all of our public agencies are very much focused on. And just to give you a sense of the location, this is Marin's one transit node, if I can call it that. We have the benefit of ferry, train, bus service, as well as we're close to both 101 and I-580. And finally, this shows, it's somewhat dated, that goes back to 2022, but what the income levels are required to move into a studio 1 and 2-bedroom apartment, and what the typical salaries are for teachers in Marin County. A rule of thumb is that 30% of one's gross income can be used for rent to be affordable. And this shows how difficult it is to live in Marin County. And with that, I will turn this back over to Suzanne.
I am so impressed with the presentation you guys have put together. It really covered a lot that I was unaware of, and I'm sure many of the people on this program also were not aware of so many ins and outs and details, and I appreciate you guys taking so much time to create such a great program. I think we can move to the Q&A. Okay, I'm going to start with the first one. What happens if we do not satisfy our regional housing needs?
Well, Danielle's the expert on this thing, but I'll tell you, this is how the process works. So the state basically says, hey, you need to put together a housing element, a housing plan that accounts for the number of units that we want you to produce. And the stick which they provided is, if you don't put together the plan that meets the number of units that you need to produce or plan for, then you're going to lose state funding. And we're also going to put a penalty, a financial penalty on you to the tune of about $100,000 per month. So that over time can essentially bankrupt a city. So they had a pretty strong stick that they swung at us. And cities up and down the coast in California tried to fight the RHNA. Even the city of Mill Valley filed 2 appeals on the RHNA to try to get it reduced. But everybody essentially at the end of the day produced a housing plan that accounted for the number of units that we were, required to plan for. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is the state, which is, like I alluded to before, the state is taking a different approach to housing this cycle than they have in prior cycles. In prior cycles, it was aspirational and, certainly encouraged us to produce housing. This time there's a big stick. So halfway through the cycle, i.e. in 2027, the state's going to say, hey, how are you guys doing on your housing element? Are you guys tracking towards producing the required number of units? If yes, great. If not, we're going to get involved ministerially in improving projects in your city. So they're going to remove local control. So those are 2 ways that the state is going to get involved in ensuring that all the cities up and down the coast and throughout the state are complying with their housing plans.
No,
So
Did I
then,
get that right, Danielle?
actually, I was going to add that the city of Beverly Hills, which has been does not have a housing element in place and was fighting the mandates as well, proceeded to lose a court case where they cannot permit any improvements, any residential improvements without them involving the creation of new bedrooms. So in Beverly
Wow.
Hills right now, if you want to put in a pool, which happens in Beverly Hills, not so much in Mill Valley, but want to update your kitchen and you need a permit, the building department is out of business right now.
Yeah. Portola Valley, same thing, I believe, right? Yeah. So hasn't been a successful strategy so far for cities.
So have the state mandates helped build housing?
Bruce?
I think they will, certainly, but it's, as I mentioned, it's such a long process and we still have, entitlements are a part of it, but the next phase, being construction and financing, is also very difficult in the current environment. We're still seeing construction inflation. It reminds me of the Yogi Berra line. The place is busy, or not going to the place because it's so busy. Or the place, anyways, whatever the old Yogi Berra line was.
Nobody goes there anymore. It's too busy.
There you go.
Yeah,
No
yeah.
one's starting construction, but construction costs are going up. And I find that very interesting in the housing sector. Taking a step further, we're also buffeted by the headwinds of financing and what's occurred as interest rates have increased and lending requirements have tightened. And finally, the insurance market has created much higher operating costs. So you add those all up and it's just a very heavy lift to move a project forward, even with the acceleration or the expediting the entitlement process.
But you've got things like SB 330 that have streamlined it, that have made it easier for you to get through local jurisdictions.
Once again, I think these housing projects will get built, but I think it's a while before we actually see the housing units created.
Yeah, and like you said, the timelines are very long, and even on Hamilton Drive, or Bayfront Terrace, as we call it right now, that's already an entitled project. It takes 2 years to get construction and financing in place, optimistically, as you say, with interest rates, another 2 years to build. So by the time we're done with it, it'll take us over 11 years to get that project completed from the time that we formed the Housing Advisory Committee in 2017. That's a long time.
Okay, someone asked specifically, what is quote unquote infill housing?
Why don't I take this one? Infill housing is located within the existing infrastructure. It largely involves reuse of existing sites. So as opposed to the opposite is greenfield development, and in Marin, we're very sensitive to that. So we are focused internally in order to keep the open spaces the way they are.
Okay, Charlie asked, how does the state determine how many units that one city must create versus another?
I can take that one. That's a fun one. Well, so it depends. We've been through a few cycles and it depends on the hot topics. So for a while it was about smart growth. And so the last RENA cycles focused on smart growth, and it's also about population increases and then the economy also. So in the previous cycle, smart growth was a concept, and as well as these priority areas near transit was a concept. And then the economy took a dive. And so then the regional housing needs were modified based on the economy. So for this new, and that's when we had, I think, 129 units. This new cycle was based on population projections, although those have changed. And then the new hot topics, in addition to transit-oriented development and smart growth, is really looking at diversity and fair housing, making sure that we're sprinkling different types of housing everywhere, and making sure that we are not displacing existing communities that might be seeing as, we've had a few slides on these changes in incomes and different populations coming through or in a different area that might displace some homeowners that have been there before.
And then within, between cities, is there any particular, strong math between?
So then that concept,
Larkspur?
So then that concept is, so that's a big picture level. Then the Regional Housing Association of Bay Area Governments has the number, goes through the counties, but the Association of Bay Area Governments then divvies it up. And it's based on the same concept. They have their own formula, but it's on the same thing. It's on sustainability. It's on these priority development areas, conservation. So the same topics are addressed, but they're then more granularly looked at that regional and then local level. And we did have conversations, and we did try to fight back on our regional housing numbers, but the Association of Bay Area Governments did not modify our numbers based on our objections.
And our objection was primarily safety. Again, we have a very high fire risk in Mill Valley, and we didn't want to put density in the hillside and areas that were at risk and make evacuation more difficult. That's essentially why we were appealing those numbers.
Okay. Another ask, are all the increased units only rental? Are there plans to build units for low income ownership so that people can build wealth?
Sure. So we have, we need a lot of housing, right? Yeah. So the city is building rental housing. There are opportunities on sites that are not owned by the city to include affordable housing. And if those are for sale units, as I mentioned, one of four of the units must be affordable. And that unit would be sold to an affordable household, and they would then keep that household. They must live in the household, and then that household would be sold when the property owner decided to sell it, and that's how they accumulate wealth. That's correct.
Okay, another question is, why is there no impetus for ADUs to be used for low income housing and not personal gym, home office, or storage area?
Yeah, that's a good question. So a little bit of a history. So when I was on the Planning Commission, Danielle put together a very good ordinance that we started to implement in Mill Valley. This is around 2016. I think it was one of the first things I did when I was a planning commissioner. And what we did is we said, hey, we're a built out community. Let's put in more ADUs, but let's do them smartly, right? Let's make them so that they're affordable units. And so we created an ordinance that essentially said, hey, you can use it for your family. You can use it for, caretakers. And we want you to rent them. And if you rent them, we'll give you a 500 square foot density bonus. In other words, we'll allow you to build more on your property than you would otherwise be able to build. However, it has to be deed restricted so that you rent it out at 80% of the AMI. So that's a way of creating affordable housing on property that already exists, ADUs, smaller units, and they get rented out below market. So that was a good way of doing that. Regrettably, in 2020, or around about that period of time, the state started getting very serious about creating more housing in the state of California, and they created a whole new set of legislation surrounding accessory dwelling units that obliterated the, I think, very sensible plan that we had for the city of Mill Valley to create affordability.
That's sad.
That was a very
Um,
sad point.
And there's no way you can go back and work around that. It's a
So we
done
tried
deal.
really hard. So John McCauley, when he was mayor, and we had long discussions with Mike McGuire, with Mark Levine. We explained what we were doing. We explained our built-out environment. We explained the fire risk. We explained what we were doing with ADUs. There was just no budging. You know, they want to have a different ADU law that basically, you know, incentivize larger units that basically are rent for more money, and get this going everywhere in the state of California. So it was a one-size-fit-all approach to creating ADUs in the state of California.
Karen had a good question, especially with Bruce. But if there's no private developer that comes in and applies to build, how's it supposed to happen as far as the mandates?
Right. So that's why it's important to, that balancing act and making sure that we're providing, and that's why the housing element, as much as I have a love-hate relationship with it, it happens every years, but it's important to think, and it's part of the general plan that includes transportation and community vitality, other sections of the general plan. But it's really important to think about what you want your community to look like, not only now, but in the future. So it gives us a chance to do that. And so it was clear that our land use was not going to accommodate 865 units, or our trends, if you look, we're not building anything but ADUs. So even if we don't want 865 units, we need to talk about how we're going to accommodate those concerns of the community, right? Of how we're making room for our next generation, our kids coming back, or, if seniors want to live somewhere else. So what are we doing to address that? We need to change our ability to build those housing units and have that happen.
And you might have covered this, but what is the quote unquote origin of mandates for low income housing?
I don't know how they get to the percentage. I think this round, it was just a percentage based on the total. I can tell you there's conversations for the next cycle that they're already starting to talk about, where higher resource areas, which Mill Valley is one of, would receive more of the lower income units than the above moderate units. So that's something we can anticipate for the next round.
I can just add as local context. So some statistics that I think are relevant here. So 70% roughly of our workforce does not live in Mill Valley, right? They drive in from outside of our community. Why? Because it's less expensive to live outside of Marin County. So there's that. And then of those working in Mill Valley, 50%, more than 50% make less than $50,000. Bruce showed some statistics about what it costs to rent. $50,000 won't get you anywhere in the city. So that's why we have to create low income housing in Mill Valley, is to house people that work in our community. It's an economic thing as well as an equity thing.
Okay, and Mary said, excellent presentation. Thank you all for your efforts to address Marin's undeniable housing unit shortage. However, there's another shortage in our county, water. Is the state willing to fund desalination plants or other solutions in order to make the mandated increase in our population viable? Or am I being too simplistic?
I'm not aware of that they're willing to come in and, I mean, I'm sure the water district is working on getting state funding. You get state funding for, you know, a variety of infrastructure projects. So we get state funding for roads, for example, right? So, but, you know, the short answer is they do not care about the constraints on your infrastructure when you're putting together your housing element. We went through all of this with water, because you recall when we were working on the housing element in 2021 and 22, we were in the midst of a very severe drought. And everybody was saying, how can you possibly go and create 865 new units if you've got no water? Well, okay, that's a statewide problem as well, right? I mean, it was a statewide drought. So we have the exact same problem that everybody else has got. That also, by the way, holds true for transportation. I mean, we complain constantly about our lack of transportation infrastructure in this county, and I think rightfully so. I mean, it's a problem here, but it's a problem elsewhere as well. So it's not something which gets factored into the discussion about how many housing units, you know, Marin County gets versus Napa County or Solano County.
I'd also add that relative to water and other resources, multifamily housing and the housing element is all about intensifying things. Apartments, multifamily, higher density housing is much more efficient with those resources. So they don't create the same sort of demand that a single family home with a lot of landscaping does, or a single family home that currently exists in the community.
Yeah, and I guess the other point is that most water is not for housing, right? Most water gets used in agriculture, it gets used in other ways. It doesn't actually get used for supporting households.
Okay. Given another question from Phil, given the limited availability of building sites in Mill Valley and economic constraints on building new housing, the prospect of meeting Mill Valley's RENA requirement appears to be dim. Does anyone on the panel have any new ideas to spur development of new housing in Mill Valley?
So I'll just start by saying these numbers were highly criticized when they came out. Everybody criticized the RENA process. They criticized the end result of these things. I mean, everybody. You can go back and look, and you'll see every single one of our county supervisors. There's 5 supervisors. Every single one of them criticized this process. Probably every single mayor in Marin County, as well as up and down the coast, criticized these numbers. It's going to be very, very challenging for us to reach this. So just to kind of put it in perspective, again, we did 130 units during an 8-year period. We were one of 2 out of 12 jurisdictions in Marin to actually produce the required number of housing units. 2 out of 12, and that's when we had 130 units. Now we're doing 865 units. How many do you think are actually going to produce the required number of units during the next 8 years? Not very many, right? 0, basically. I mean, if we do 50 units per year, we'll get to 400. 50 units is significantly higher than what we produced in the past, and 400 is less than half of what we're supposed to produce during the next 8-year period. So it's going to be challenging. I mean, ADUs we've been producing, but we do 16 of those roughly per year, 16 to 20. Very hard to get there with existing housing stock, people producing ADUs. We will try really hard with multi-unit housing because, as both Danielle and Bruce have mentioned, that's the kind of housing that we're missing in Mill Valley. We're missing housing that's affordable by design. It's smaller units. It allows people that have aged out of their homes to remain in Mill Valley and to move down into a smaller sized housing unit and stay in our community. That's really important. And it allows young people to move into our city. 1/3 of our city now trending towards being seniors. So 1/3 of Mill Valley are seniors. That's an aging community, right?
Yes.
We need to get young people into our city that can grow old in our city. So we need to get them in, and that brings vitality to our city. So you know, all of our children that grew up here that moved away, if they will ever want to come back to Mill Valley, they'll need to start someplace, and moving into a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment that's 1,000 square feet, that works, and that'll be affordable by design. So that's a good thing. So that's the kind of stuff that is literally the plan. And the plan is to put that density along transit corridors like Miller Avenue, Camino Alto. That's literally the plan.
And I would just add that the situation that Mill Valley finds itself, we have professionals who are living in older apartments because they certainly have the ability to pay more rent, but there isn't anything nice and new. So it basically crowds out the workforce. So by building some new apartments in the Miller Avenue corridor or elsewhere, will actually take some of the burden off some of the older product that exists on Miller and could help the affordability.
Okay, we're running really short on time. I'm going to try to get through a few more quickly. Community Land Trust have unique tools to provide community citric housing. Can you speak to that?
We don't have someone here on the panel for that, but yes, the community land trust, there are land trusts in Mill Valley. You can contact me and I can provide information. It does provide opportunities to either gift your piece of property or use that property in perpetuity for affordable housing while you actually stay in the home until you pass away and you can gift that property. So there are unique opportunities there. The city of Mill Valley is coordinating and working with Mount Tam Land Trust to find opportunities, potentially also acquisitions.
Okay, I'm going to give you one more. Given the precedent set in getting public property for subsidized housing development, what other public property, quote unquote, what you refer to as city-owned property, are you considering for future use in the pursuit of this agenda? Are the tennis courts on East Blythedale still a part of this discussion?
I can take that one if you want. I mean,
I would just start that. I would say, we're working on One Hamilton. That's the priority. We have funding to do. And then we would circle back on additional pieces of property. But then I'll let the mayor continue that conversation.
Yeah, so we're not anxious to get rid of community recreational resources. So I always equate building on the tennis courts at Boyle, the equivalent of building right on the soccer fields at hockey. We're not building on the soccer field at hockey. We're building on a vacant lot across the street. So if there was land next to the tennis courts, like there is next to the soccer fields, that would be an equivalency. So I don't see the tennis courts being a viable site. Those tennis courts are booked out all the time. It's a valuable community resource. I don't see that happening. We did, Danielle and a consultant basically put together a sites inventory. We went through every single property in the city of Mill Valley. We identified every single city-owned property. We ranked them based on their slope, based on their size, based on physical hazards that are present on them. We have a short list of properties that we think might be suitable for affordable housing. We don't know actually how we're going to implement that, but we are not done using city land for affordable housing. We're going to have to. I mean, if you think about top down, if 50% of our arena has to be below AMI and the inclusionary percentage is only 25%, well, you've got a pretty big gap between what you need to plan for and produce and what you're actually able to do through the market force. So the city has to be involved in some way. Hamilton Drive is one example of that. And I think we've got the ability to do at least one more similar project. And what we'd want to do is do it in a transit-rich corridor like Miller Avenue. That's where we'd want to do it.
Speaking of Miller Avenue, there is a question which we knew we would have. The large retaining wall, is some of that being designated as affordable housing?
Yeah, the answer is no. So that project started in 2007. So that project started, 14 years ago. It got entitled in 2011. So that's now 13 years ago. And so the building that you see that's being constructed right now, or that's mostly framed out, that's a commercial building. It's part of the same site. The building to the left of it with the concrete podium is a 9-unit, frankly, 9 luxury unit apartment buildings. So this was before affordability kind of came into the conversation. It's before there was any inclusionary housing in Marin County. So that's that project. The good news is right next door to that, 510 Miller, which was the prior Taco Bell, that's been to the Planning Commission already. That's 20 units. That's what was planned. And the great thing about that, it's a mix of 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom apartments. The 1-bedrooms are 750 square feet. The 2-bedrooms are about 1,000 square feet. Those are affordable by design. It's literally the kind of development that you want to see take place on Miller Avenue. Those will be great units for people that want to remain in Mill Valley and downsize, or move to Mill Valley and get started in life.
So we are already over time and there are a few questions left. I'm hopeful that we can get those answered by email and I'm sorry we don't have time for all of the questions, but I certainly want to I thought it was an excellent presentation. I can see the time that Urban and Stephanie and Bruce all put into this. I'm sure we all learned a lot. I did. And we really appreciate everybody participating, the questions, your interest. And this is our last program for the OAC on the way we calendar. So we will start up in the fall with new and exciting programs. We hope you're welcome to come back. We hope you join us. And I just want to thank everybody for participating and being a part of today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Good afternoon.
Good
Have a great-
afternoon.